Good morning. Are you here, Carla? Okay. Class is dismissed. Y'all bow with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, for another wonderful day, thank you. For the sunshine, a little bit of heat, thank you. Lead us and guide us. Keep your hand on us. Let us do things that are pleasing in your sight. Things that are good for the people of the state of Georgia. Bless us and keep us. Thank you for your love and mercy. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to go a little quick. I hope everybody's had a good morning. We can now start. The leaders here. And the pro tem slipped in on the other side, so told the speaker a couple of years ago I was going to buy him a watch. I have to buy 2 more now, apparently. Okay, who have we got? Mr. Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come before you to ask for 740, House Bill 740. This bill would allow the Department of Natural Resources to sell a hunting and fishing license to those that serving active duty in the military at the in-state rate, regardless of where they resided, whether here or in some part of the country at a different military base. The Department of Natural Resources supports the bill.
Any questions? Mr. Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
How'd you get here?
Mr. Chairman. Yes, I am. So what this bill is going to do, this is going to allow any military personnel to come to Georgia and buy a state, in-state hunting license, correct?
That's correct.
Do you have any idea about how many people in the military that live in other states that actually hunt or fish?
I have 3 different constituents just in my district that approached me, and that's the reason I drafted this bill about their sons, 2 sons and 1 son-in-law that this affects, just in my small area that has actually been proactive and come to me prior to me drafting the bill. DNR couldn't provide exact numbers. They believe this will actually be a positive revenue generation bill because we get federal money, as you know, matching funds from the number of licenses we sell. So even though we're giving a reduced cost, we'll actually get more licenses sold as a result.
Well, do we know how many people we expect to see come to the state of Georgia as a result of the change of this law, giving them a preference, in-state license fee versus the other people who be paying out-of-state license fee?
No, sir.
No?
No, sir. We talked about that with the department, but no one has any way to gauge that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to go back to my district and explain to my constituents why they have to pay the same fee as everybody else from other states who are coming in here, and why their children who live in Alabama or Tennessee right across the border, if they want to hunt in Georgia, they got to pay out-of-state license fees.
Well, and this is just for active duty military personnel, and what happens is people who are from Georgia are stationed in Virginia or stationed in some other part of the country or the world for a period of 5 years plus. They buy a house there, they claim their residency there, and they want to come back and hunt with their family. That's where the issue comes from. I personally feel very comfortable giving the military a break on their hunting license.
Mr. Williams.
For the benefit of my friend and learned attorney, out of 22,000 military people at Fort Stewart, probably about 14,000 of them are out of state, and they spend a lot of money on hunting and fishing, and I've never seen so many camouflage suits from people who came from Midtown New York in my life. But we have a lot of folk this will really benefit. It would be great for active duty military people.
Would you like to go ahead and tell me how many again, and you're the largest what?
I have the largest percentage of military people of any district in Georgia. We have 22,000 active duty, not counting dependents, which will put us around 47,000 connected to Fort Stewart Hunter.
Mr. Tanner, would you like to explain the excise tax that we get back?
Can you repeat that, Mr. Chairman?
No.
Do what? The Davis-Bacon Act?
Yes. Okay, never mind.
Thank you.
Any other question for Mr. Tanner? Bye.
Thank you.
Wait a second. Mr. Knight, you come.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm bringing before you House Bill 786, and this is, again, dealing with the hunting license, and I may be able to answer some questions regarding the prior bill also, if it pleases the chair. House Bill 786 does primarily two things. It does away with the residency requirement for an infant. Let me repeat this: an infant lifetime license from 0 up to 2 years of age. Okay? And it also simplifies the residency requirements by allowing the current Georgia driver's license to suffice. Before that, it was tax returns, Social Security, a lot of other documentation. As we all know, the process of getting a driver's license now is pretty rigorous. And so we can now rely on that as a simple way of proving residency for the rest of it. So again, this bill only does two things. It's the residency requirement for the infant, 0 to 2 years of age, okay? Now, I guess in response to probably some questions that were in regards to Representative Tanner's bill, first of all, looking at fees or going out, why this makes financial sense. In regards to the lifetime license, we get $200. That stays in a fund in the state of Georgia, and we earn interest off of that for the lifetime of that hunter. So if a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, a grandfather has a child that family comes back to hunt and say they live in Tennessee, and he says, I'm going to buy that child a license, okay? We take that $200 and it sits in a trust fund, okay? And we earn interest on it until he is about 70 years old. I think that's the age. It's 60 or 70 years of age. Plus, and here's the physical sense of it, and referring to the question that was posed earlier, it's the Dingell-Johnson-Pittman-Robinson's Act. We as hunters, fishermen, okay? When we buy our hunting equipment and our fishing equipment, at the manufacturer level, there's an excise tax that is paid into the Department of Wildlife. And it is to go back to the states to be reinvested in our hunting and our fishing, our wildlife and our fishing conservation. It's not our income tax dollars, it's what we pay for on our equipment that we use. And that's what Representative Tanner was referring to, and the same thing in here. Currently, we receive every year about $43 for every license that is counted for. It's part of that computation, how it's allocated back to the states. So in Representative Tanner's bill, that's why they're saying it makes financial sense. In regards to this bill and what we're doing, again, it's an effort and a recruitment effort to try to get more people, young people and children, from watching the television set, playing those damnable games, excuse my French, okay, and getting back out and enjoying the great outdoors. And that's what this bill does, Mr. Chairman.
Dadgum, it made me tired. Any questions? No, thank you. Sit down. Thank you, David. Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I come to ask for your consideration today House Bill 809. This bill would amend our Fair Practices Act to prohibit the bad faith assertions of patent infringement claims, commonly known as patent trolling. It's a plague that's small businesses in Georgia have been enduring for a number of years now. It's become to national attention. This bill is based on model legislation passed by the National Council of State Governments. It is very similar legislation is moving through 13 other state legislatures right now, and I would ask for your favorable consideration of this bill.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here to ask for House Bill 800. It's a bill to provide for a nonpartisan election of the probate judge, the probate court of Lanier County.
Mr. Willard.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Shaw.
Good morning.
There's a bill that I have brought which is to make nonpartisan all probate judges and all magistrates. Assuming your bill were to go forward, I hope it does. It's a good program, but I suggest what we might want to do is wait and see if the whole spectrum of these people who are in judicial office will recognize there should not be partisan election for them because they are to handle people before them without recognition of any partisanship. Would you be open to holding your bill up until that one comes forward, or you want to go ahead and proceed?
Well, I know we've already passed a few of these last week, but so I'd
only with coroners.
Certainly yield to your guidance on that.
Only with coroners. We didn't include coroners.
But I'd rather just want to make sure we get this done for my people back home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to Mr. Shaw's legislation and Chairman Willard's point, there's certainly an ability to operate on dual tracks so that in the event that both bills pass and there's a timing mechanism about which bill is signed when, that way we're not holding up Mr. Shaw's bill, and if for some reason any statewide legislation doesn't go, then Mr. Shaw has not derailed. Just a suggestion.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you.
Never mind, who's got a question? Anybody over here? Okay. Mr. Hamilton.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I bring to you for consideration House Bill 837. We've been in the misdemeanor probation, or the state got out of the misdemeanor probation business 22 years ago, and a recent ruling by a Superior Court judge has determined that tolling, which is the ability to stop the clock on misdemeanor probation, is illegal. And so we've presently got over 320,000 misdemeanor probationers in the state of Georgia that the courts have no ability to toll their sentences should they be able to abscond. And so all this bill does, it doesn't deal with anything other than recognizing and putting back into law the same exact powers that the courts have always had to be able to toll those misdemeanor sentences. And I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hamilton, can you describe in a little more detail the findings of the court that made this bill necessary?
Well, the findings of the court basically determined that the portion of the tolling, they read into a word that says that probation does not. Well, the word not was actually directed towards the administrative part of the probationer. So what we did, what Led's counsel did, they took all the non-administrative parts of that code section that for 22 years we've honored, and we simply brought that back over to say this is what they will have the power to do. And so in essence, it is the exact same thing that we've been practicing for 22 years.
Further question? Is there a minimum amount of fines? Is there a threshold? The reason I ask, there's a recent news story that identified that someone was held in Georgia's prisons for a $4 fine, and that the private probation, the regulation of private probation has really led to grave inequities in how this is applied. Does this bill address the concern that was raised both in that article and by the courts that private probation is not held to a high enough standard to guarantee the freedom that should be embedded in the way these organizations operate?
Sure, I'll be happy to answer that. Let me clarify some of the things that have been read as recently as today in this great paper out there, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. This bill is not about private probation. It's about misdemeanor probation. And so every power that a probation officer or a probation entity has, every single power that they have is given to them by the judge, by the court. So every one of these fines is determined by the judge, by the court. In no case does a probation organization set a fee or a fine or any type of process without the judge having an order or a contract that administers that. Also, the governing body, in the case of a county or a municipality, they approve that contract. And so there's people out there that are trying to say that the private probation companies are setting outrageous fees. They don't set these fees. These fees are set and approved by the court. And all this bill does is take it back to the point where we can have that tolling. And as we said in committee yesterday, if someone is against private probation, introduce legislation. That's perfectly fine if someone wants to do that. Now, I don't agree with it, but that is not what this bill does. This bill simply goes back and takes it to where it originally was in 1992.
Mr. Gold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to make sure it's clear, this case that came out of Augusta, and I had some communication with one of my judges over the summer or fall, and they pulled the fire alarm on it. When we're talking about the tolling, it's when the individual fails to appear. It really is the inability of the judge or the court to go ahead and stop the clock. The individual doesn't appear in their regular probation appearance schedule, whatever it may be, according to the terms of their probation. They don't know where that individual is. The clock is still ticking, and then all of a sudden they show up, they've got a year of probation, they show up on day 364, and there's nothing to revoke. So they've kind of gamed the system in a way, but it's really because of a quirk in the law as it is right now, unless we go ahead and make that change.
That is exactly correct. And so in theory, and first of all, misdemeanor probations are maxed out at 1 year. And so in theory, you could have anybody on probation in Georgia, and the fines associated with that are also at the end of that time period. So they could go to Alabama or Florida or some other state for that year, come back, and as far as the courts are concerned, all restitution has been made, even though they've never once paid $1 or gone to a probation office.
Mr. Weldon.
I'll wait. Thank
All right. Mr. Stevens.
House Bill 791 is a very simple bill. It just, back in 2004, it said that we created military zones for purposes of development whenever there were high poverty rates, and those areas that were close to military installations, adjacent to military installations. All this bill does, it says that if an inadvertent line on a track, on a census tract, moves them out of a military zone, if they previously had that zone, they couldn't be disqualified just for the moving of that line.
Questions? Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Friendly question, just sort of a inquiry more than a question. could these military zones ever be confused with areas contiguous to military installations that may be under consideration for what the military refers to sometimes as encroachment, which can limit mission acceptance ability of our bases? Is that,
No.
and you, as you vetted this bill, did that issue ever come up, or is it, or we're not, that couldn't be an unintended consequence of this, could it?
Not at all. This and the language of the bill and its original intent was to help in development, particularly in the industrial areas for these high poverty rate areas that are also adjacent to military areas, to give them some sort of a leg up. But it has nothing to do with with what you just asked about. And I don't believe, and we've also vetted this through the Department of Community Affairs, the scenarios come up with one of the counties where, with the recent census tract, there was one strip of land that got placed in between the military zone and the way that the bill was originally drawn up in 2004. This strictly fixes that.
Anything else? All right. We'll set the calendar for tomorrow under modified open. HB 740, do I hear a move? Any opposed? So, modified open, HB 786. Any opposed? So, modified open, HB 37. What did I say? 837. Going once, twice. Yes, ma'am.
I request a one-day hold of this bill.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Got a request for hold on 837 under modified open, HB 809. Any opposed? Under open, HB 800. Any opposed? Under modified open, HB 791. Any opposed? That's it.